Everyone laughed when a poor shoemaker's son said, "One day I will fly an airplane." Years later, the same people looked up at the sky and saw him flying above them. In a small, crowded town, there lived a poor shoemaker named Daniel. Daniel worked from early morning until late at night in a tiny shop near the town market. His shop was old, his tools were worn out, and most days he barely earned enough money to feed his family. But Daniel had one treasure that poverty could never take away from him: his son, Alex. Alex was a quiet and curious boy. While other children played football in the streets, Alex often looked toward the sky. Whenever an airplane passed above the town, he would stop whatever he was doing and watch it until it disappeared beyond the clouds. One afternoon, Alex ran into his father's shop. "Dad, did you see that airplane?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, son, I saw it. One day I'm going to fly one." Daniel stopped working. For a moment, he looked at his son. Then he smiled and placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. "If that's your dream, never be ashamed of it." But the dream was not easy. Alex's family was extremely poor. They lived in a small house with an old roof. Sometimes there wasn't enough food for everyone. His father had never been inside an airplane. His mother had never traveled far from their town. And Alex had never even touched the controls of a real aircraft. At school, some children laughed when Alex told them about his dream. "You, a pilot? You can't even afford a bicycle. Pilots come from rich families." Alex said nothing. He simply looked at the sky. One evening, he asked his father, "Dad, do you think someone like me can really become a pilot?" Daniel looked at his son's tired face. "Son, shoes don't decide where a person can walk, and poverty doesn't decide how high a person can dream." Those words stayed, and he became serious about his studies. He studied mathematics, science, physics, and English whenever he could. But there was a problem. His school didn't have many books. So Alex walked several kilometers every day to the town library. He couldn't afford expensive study materials, so he borrowed old books and copied important lessons into a notebook. Sometimes he fell asleep over his books. Sometimes he was exhausted, but every morning he started again. But his family still struggled. When Alex finished school, he discovered that pilot training was extremely expensive. The dream that once seemed difficult now looked almost impossible. Alex returned home with tears in his eyes. "Dad, maybe I should forget about becoming a pilot." Daniel put down his tools. "Why?" "Because we don't have the money." Daniel looked around the tiny shop. Then he looked at his son. "We may not have money, Alex, but we still have hope." Alex shook his head. "How can I become a pilot without money?" Daniel smiled. "Then don't look for money first. Look for a way." That night, Alex made a decision. He would not give up. Alex began searching for scholarships. Every day, he visited websites, schools, training centers, and offices. He filled out application after application, and then came the rejection letters. Rejected, not selected. Application unsuccessful. One rejection became 5. 5 became 10. 10 became 20. Every rejection hurt. But Alex remembered his father's words. Look for a way. So he kept searching. One morning, he found a scholarship program for students from financially disadvantaged families. The program offered financial support for aviation training. Alex immediately applied. Weeks later, he received an invitation for an entrance examination. He traveled to the city using money his father had saved for months. The examination was difficult. There were hundreds of talented students. Some had studied in expensive schools. Some had already flown in training simulators. Alex had none of those advantages, but he had prepared harder than anyone. When the results were announced, Alex couldn't believe his eyes. He had been selected. He ran home. "Dad, I got it." Daniel couldn't speak. He simply hugged his son. For the first time, Daniel cried tears of happiness. But getting the scholarship was only the beginning. Pilot training was demanding. Alex struggled with technical subjects. He struggled with communication. He struggled with confidence. During his first simulator session, he made several mistakes. His instructor told him, "You need more practice." Alex felt embarrassed. That evening, he called his father. "I don't think I'm good enough." Daniel replied, "Do you remember how many shoes I repaired before I became good at my work?" Alex laughed. "Hundreds? Thousands," Daniel said. "Nobody becomes excellent on the first attempt. You practice until difficult things become normal." Alex returned to training the next morning. He practiced, then practiced again and again. He studied flight procedures. He learned aircraft systems. He practiced communication. He reviewed every mistake. Slowly, he improved. Months later, his instructor noticed the change. "You're different now," the instructor said. Alex smiled. "I decided that my mistakes would become my teachers." His final flight examination eventually arrived. Alex walked toward the aircraft with nervous hands. For a moment, he remembered his childhood, the tiny shoe shop, his father repairing shoes, the old house, the children laughing at his dream, the airplanes he used to watch from the street. Then he took a deep breath. The aircraft began moving. A few moments later, it lifted from the runway. Alex was flying, but he still had one final challenge: the landing. He carefully followed the instructions. The aircraft descended smoothly. The wheels touched the runway. Alex had passed. His instructor shook his hand. "Congratulations! You're ready to begin your career." Alex looked toward the sky. He had finally achieved the dream everyone once told him was impossible. But he wasn't finished.
After completing his training, Alex began applying for pilot jobs. Once again, rejection came. Airline after airline rejected his application. Some companies wanted more experience. Others preferred candidates from famous aviation schools. Alex felt frustrated, but he refused to return home defeated. He took smaller opportunities. He worked hard. He gained experience. He continued studying. He saved money. And every time an opportunity appeared, he was ready. Finally, one airline invited him for an interview. Alex arrived wearing his best clothes. During the interview, the manager asked, "Why do you want to become a pilot?" Alex paused. Then he smiled. "Because when I was a child, I looked at airplanes from the street. I didn't just want to see them. I wanted to know what it felt like to fly one." The manager asked another question. "What's the biggest challenge you've overcome?" Alex thought about his father. "My biggest challenge was believing that poverty could decide my future." The manager looked impressed. Several days later, Alex received the call. He had been hired. Alex couldn't believe it. He immediately called his father. "Dad." "Yes, son, I got the job." There was silence. Then Daniel began crying. "I'm proud of you," Alex replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." Months later, Alex's first commercial flight was scheduled. As he prepared for takeoff, he looked through the cockpit window. The runway stretched ahead. The engines began to roar. The aircraft accelerated. And then, it rose into the sky. Alex smiled. Thousands of feet below him were roads, buildings, fields, and towns. Somewhere down, there was the little town where his dream had begun. And inside that town was a tiny shoe shop. After landing, Alex went straight home. He walked into his father's shop. Daniel was sitting at his workbench, repairing a pair of shoes. Alex placed something on the table. It was his pilot's cap. Daniel looked at it. Then he looked at his son. "You did it." Alex smiled. "No, Dad." He picked up one of his father's old shoes. "We did it." Daniel hugged his son. The man who had spent his life repairing shoes had raised a son, who now flew above the clouds. Years later, whenever Alex flew over his hometown, he would look down from the cockpit. He remembered the little boy who once stood in the street dreaming about airplanes. He remembered every rejection, every difficult night, every sacrifice, every moment when giving up seemed easier. And he understood something important. Your starting point does not determine your destination. You may begin with nothing. You may come from poverty. People may laugh at your dreams. You may fail again and again. But if you keep learning, keep working, and keep moving forward, your circumstances do not have to become your future. Alex's father made shoes. His son learned to fly, and together, they proved that a dream can rise higher than poverty. Final message: never be ashamed of where you come from. Your family may not have money. You may not have connections. You may not have the best opportunities. But if you have determination, patience, and the courage to keep going, you can build a future that nobody expected. Dream beyond your circumstances, work beyond your excuses, and never stop believing in yourself.